Now, after several delays, Comair has finally published its business rescue plan. Now, the plan will see the aircraft being 99% owned by what they call a preferred investor. The investor, who has not yet been named, will inject 500 million rand into Comair, with the first tranche expected this month. Now, the plan suggests that Comair will be delisted from the JSE and a new board will be constituted in due course. The turnaround plan is focused on rationalizing operating costs and growing ancillary revenue. The airline will also cut almost 400 jobs through voluntary retrenchment programs and a Section 189 retrenchment process. Now, creditors and shareholders will vote on the plan on the 18th of September. Now, if this plan is accepted, this will see the airline back in the skies by the 1st of December. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Guy Leitch, who is the editor of SA Flyer magazine. A very good afternoon to you, Guy. Getting straight into this Comair issue. Now, Comair's fleet comprises at least 20 aircraft. Now, when we look at this, a 500 million rand price tag, is it justifiable?
Yeah, well, obviously the key question is what is the future earnings prospect of the company? And that is extremely hard to say, simply because we have very little idea how long it's going to take the post-COVID recovery for the airline to get back to flying profitable loads. So it has to be said that the investor, while appearing to have got a great bargain for 500 million rand, is taking a big risk going forward. Obviously, they are looking for an additional 1.4 billion rand in additional funding to continue to fund the operation. But the point is that they've managed to get themselves a bargain. In terms of the aircraft, a lot of the aircraft, or the older aircraft, are owned by the airline, and it's got a good, fantastically good profit record, having traded profitably for the last 74 years. So I think that they've got themselves a good deal at 500 million rand.
But isn't this the issue then, the fact that Comair does have a history of being hugely profitable, and when we look at the price tag of the value of its current assets, 500 million rand looks like a steal?
Absolutely. I mean, you consider that a new Boeing 737 costs in the order of over R1 billion. Just 500 million rand for the whole business certainly is a steal. But then the whole airline industry is under tremendous pressure, and it has to be said that around the world the airline industry has been getting bailed out by government. Of course, in South Africa, it's meant that only the state-owned airlines have been getting bailed out by government, and that means that the real tragedy of Comair being in its current position is that what are called the current creditors are currently being absolutely shorn, not just given a haircut. They are, under the current plan, being given just 40 million rand to cover the 1.4 billion rands worth of debts. That is 2.6 or so cents in the rand, which is even worse than the 7 cents that were offered to South African Airways creditors. Look, the secured creditors are obviously getting their full payout, which enables the airline to get going. But the important thing is that there are at least 2 investors that we know of waiting in the wings to take over Comair. And these are the investor that we believe is the favored investor or has been selected, has already a long history with Comair as its founders. And certainly they are well known to be extremely skillful airline operators. And we see the return of people like Mr. Glenn Osmond, a former joint CEO with Ronel Stander. So there's no shortage of good skills returning to the airline. I think it will give the comfort to all the 1,800 employees who retain their jobs that the airline will continue to trade. And I think it will be great for Christmas travellers if they do get flying from the 1st of December, because South African travellers certainly need the competition to keep prices as affordable as they have been.
Now, let's go back to this plan that we have on the table now. The plan also says that up to 15% of the total will be allocated to a suitable triple BE partner within 12 months. Do you think that's feasible?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there have been a number of consortiums bidding for Comair. One of the other consortiums is the Harith Consortium, which owns Lanseria Airport very successfully, and they have very strong BEE credentials. So I think there's plenty of room to get certainly an equity shareholder in. Whether they manage to make it work for the actual employees or not is obviously a much more difficult task in terms of creating trusts and so on for holding those sort of shareholders. But, you know, where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm confident that the quality of the Comair management team will continue and be able to solve these sort of challenges.
We mentioned this a little bit earlier on in our conversation this afternoon, that the equity injection will not be sufficient to implement the plan in its totality, that a further 1.4 billion rand is actually required. Will Comair actually be able to raise this money? You mentioned that there are a couple of investors who are keen, but how confident can we be that this deal will actually come through?
That is the 1.4 billion rand question, isn't it? And the other question that also remains to be asked is, or answered rather, is what will actually happen on the 18th of September, which is the date that the creditors have to approve the current business plan. You know, given that the extreme haircut that the current creditors are getting, it has to be a possibility that they would reject the plan. But the secured creditors also have a vote, and it seems fairly confident at this stage that they will carry the day in terms of the support for the business plan. So, yeah, I think that the first step is getting the business plan actually approved on the 18th of September. We are led to believe that that will happen. And I think that once that happens, I think that they will indeed be able to raise the necessary funding from the rest of the industry. It's a relatively small amount for an extremely good, well-run airline.
Now, if the plan is approved, then the airline will end up having to cut about a fifth of its workforce, and that means nearly 400 people who will lose their jobs. Could this have been averted in any way?
Probably not, and without a state bailout of the airline as well. And of course, the moment the state starts bailing out private companies, you've got to ask, well, where would it stop? FlySAF Air would want assistance, and many of the other airlines. Look, it also needs to be noted that Mango has got R1 billion worth of assistance already, which means that the playing field remains fundamentally uneven and benefiting Mango at the expense of its competitors. But the moment, as I said, you start providing bailouts for private companies, it starts a slippery slide down a slope. So without that happening now, I think that the loss of only 400 jobs from 2,200 to 1,800 is in fact a very good result, particularly because they're able to use voluntary severance packages rather than having to fall directly back on Section 189 retrenchments.
Now, Comair is hoping to return to the skies come December the 1st rather. It's a really good time for travellers, and you know, it's a good time for people to start using the airlines as well. But is it realistic, that time frame for them?
Yes, it depends at what level. In fact, they're already losing out on a lot of business because FlySAF Air, and to this.
Unfortunately, we seem to have lost Guy Leitch there as we talk about the latest developments in Comair. Looks like some sort of a lifeline for them, but as we can see, about 400 of its employees are likely to lose their jobs should that deal go through. But 18th of September is when we ought to be waiting to hear whether or not this will be accepted. By the sounds of it, looks like we do have Guy back on the line. Guy, we were talking and I was asking you about the feasibility of being back up in the air by the 1st of December. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we know that Mango's and FlySAF Air are already flying. They might be backing to make viable loads at this stage, but it would be lovely for Comair if they could get back in the air earlier. But the real risk is run that the airlines will start flying and not be able to fill all the seats, in which case they will be burning cash faster than they're currently burning now. And that will be the most dangerous period for them to continue to operate if they're trying to get back in the air and not managing to fill the aircraft. And then, of course, there are questions around the risk of getting COVID if you're sitting next to somebody who might have one in, say, the middle seat. We still haven't got answers to whether they're going to isolate the middle seats and limit loads to 66%. We don't think that's going to happen, but it'll not be easy for in fact, it'll be impossible for airlines to make a profit if they're trying to fly from the 1st of December with very limited loads. So I think Comair will have to be very circumspect about how they do return to flight, and they've allowed themselves 7 months at least before they start, as it were, emerging from the woods, and the business rescue plan or process can actually be finalized.
Guy, I'm rather curious about the fact that 99% of Comair is going to be sold to this as yet unidentified investor. Just your thoughts on that. That's like pretty much giving it all away.
For just 500 million rand compared to what its market capitalization was when it was listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which was in the billions, as we know. And the question is, well, who owns the other 1%? I think that's a really interesting little telltale sign, because my expectation is that it's actually staying in the family, as it were. Comair was very much a family-run business until it was listed, and even after it was listed. So I think that we're seeing a residual of value attaching to either, in this case, the Moritz family, or perhaps to Mr. Glenn Osmond, who's coming back in as the CEO. Maybe they're holding on to that shareholding as well. But it's nice to see that the management, or the directors, the senior management, have enough faith to continue to hold a shareholding in the airline.
But just from your suspicions, do you think that this investor is a domestic, local investor, or do you think it might be someone from beyond our shores?
The 1% investor, I'm pretty sure, would be local. And bear in mind that there is a 25% limit on foreign ownership of South African airlines. It was always a problem when foreign unit trusts, for instance, owned shares in Comair, but that's at least not on the table at this stage. It is a local consortium that is taking over the airline, so the offshore ownership component is not really on the table. I suspect that it's going to be fully owned by South Africans. Again, a good sign.
Good chatting to you once again this afternoon, Guy. Thank you so much for that. That's Guy Leitch, their SA aviation expert.